Hey there, positive managers. Welcome to Module 4. Far too many of you make the mistake of thinking that being fair to your employees means that you have to treat everyone equally. But that assumption is so far off the mark that I felt I needed to address it as a separate topic. I want you to get over being afraid that treating your employees differently means you're going to be treating them unfairly. Let me put it this way. What if we treated our children equally instead of fairly? Does a 6-year-old have the same bedtime as a 17-year-old? Well, obviously no. And most people appreciate that it makes sense to treat children fairly, but would be a mistake to treat them equally, and to apply the same rules regardless of their ages. It's when we translate this easily understood concept into the workplace, however, that we find ourselves stumbling into failure. You may be a genuinely caring manager who wants to accommodate the individuals on your team, but you're wary of being taken advantage of and opening the floodgates to special requests. Or you're afraid to appear like you're playing favorites. However, you need to understand that your ability to fairly and deftly manage the various needs of individual employees will leave your employees feeling valued, and valued employees are engaged employees. When you abandon fairness in pursuit of equality, something happens to people's willingness to give you their all or to go that extra mile. Going the extra mile, parting with what's known as discretionary effort, is a conscious decision on the part of each employee every day. When someone makes that decision, it distinguishes him or her from others. However, if that effort is rewarded in an undistinguished manner, with equality rather than fairness, that person finds it hard to sustain discretionary effort. You can set different expectations for each of the employees on your team. The key is making sure that everyone on your team knows what the expectations are, why the expectations are different, and that everyone will be held to their expectations equally. That's fair. And that type of fair improves morale because everyone understands the rules and norms of the workplace and everyone else's expectations and holds themselves and each other accountable to them. Trust builds in that space. But does that mean you can accommodate every request and every preference? No, of course not. For example, when you have an open plan office, you can't change the noise level in the room for someone who prefers to work quietly. However, you can agree to norms of behavior that will allow people to carve out some space for their own preference. For example, allowing an employee to wear headphones to communicate to everyone around them that they're focusing on work and prefer not to be disrupted is a terrific way to be fair to that employee's needs. Or allowing your team to use a shared calendar to indicate do not disturb times. Both ways are ways that you can preserve individual preferences while maintaining the unity of your workspace. One of the more common areas of concern revolves around employees' start times. Should a person assigned to the customer service window who needs to be ready and in place when the doors open at 8 have the same start time expectation of a person who works in an office and has no contact with anyone? I've had managers who have answered that question with both yes and no. The one who thought everyone should be in their seats at 8 a.m. sharp also adhered to that your butt in the chair for 8 hours is more important than your overall contribution to the team attitude. And I'm being honest here when I tell you that I resented both of those philosophies every single day I worked for her. As I've said at the start, you can set different expectations for each of your employees on your team. What's more important is that everyone on your team knows what the expectations are, why the expectations are different, and that everyone will be held to their expectations equally. The same is true for sanctions or punishment. Punishment may be an effective corrective device for adults, but it's foolhardy and lazy to generally spray everyone in your group with the same sanctions when not everyone is guilty of the infraction being dealt with. Never call a staff meeting to share something negative that only 1 or 2 people on your team is doing. That's a sure way to kill your team's engagement. Instead, address it with those guilty individuals in their one-on-ones. Another example of applying something to an entire group and killing engagement is when it comes to the across-the-board annual raise. This may be an organizational problem and out of your control, but you can certainly share it up the food chain. A 3% across-the-board salary increase for everyone on your team isn't fair unless you've observed an across-the-board improvement in performance. A reward system based on the notion that distinguished performance merits distinguished reward is what's truly fair. People understand it when it's explained, and it increases engagement and gives people incentive to work for it. It's also important to understand that fair treatment doesn't mean equal treatment when it comes to recognition. Take John and Jeff. John enjoys public recognition and places value on being recognized in front of the team, whereas Jeff has social anxiety, and I understand this one personally, and would find public recognition torture, but greatly appreciates receiving his kudos one-on-one. Recognizing them equally would either deny John his enjoyment or torture Jeff. Knowing this about each of them and acting accordingly will make them both feel valued. And don't make the mistake of thinking that because you'd be touched and feel highly valued if your supervisor gave you a handwritten thank you note, that the same goes with everyone on your team. This is where knowing them as individuals is key. With John and Jeff again as our examples, by knowing each of their preferences, you'd recognize that giving either of them a handwritten thank you note as their recognition, rather than satisfying their individual needs, would leave both feeling disappointed and undervalued. Like Thomas Jefferson famously said, nothing demotivates people like the equal treatment of unequals. And though he wasn't referring to treating employees fairly rather than equally, it still applies. For example, when you have an underachiever on your team and treat him the same as your most productive employee, you kill the soul of that productive employee and ensure that the underachiever will continue to underperform. And again, I'm speaking from personal experience when I say to you that your job as a manager of people is to inspire maximum effort from your team, not to teach each of your star performers that their effort is wasted on you. I've seen far too many managers withhold recognition because they were afraid that treating their employees individually, yet fairly, would lead to the plain favorites label. And you know what? It's a real shame. So I'm asking you to ask yourself whether treating all of your employees the same is the best way to lead your team. I truly hope I've helped you see that the answer is no, and that I've given you some good ideas about how to go about changing how you practice fairness as a manager. So I'll see you next in Phase 4, where you'll learn all about performance duplication using my Manager Multiplier Effect process.